Take a gentle breath with me. Let your shoulders soften. Allow your heart to settle into this moment. Welcome to Where Hearts Rest. I'm honored you've chosen to spend this time here, in this sacred space where ancient wisdom meets the longing of your soul. Right now, wherever you are, whether you're walking, driving, or simply sitting in quiet, feel yourself arriving. Not just to this audio, but to something deeper. We're about to embark on a journey that has been waiting for you for 25 centuries. Close your eyes if you can. Let the world around you fade just a little. Because what we're about to explore together isn't just history, it's the story that lives in every human heart. There's a longing that echoes through every soul that has ever lived. A question that whispers in our quietest moments: how do we love? How do we love when the world feels hard? How do we love when our own hearts feel broken? How do we love truly, completely, without fear? 2,500 years ago, one heart asked this same question. A prince who had everything the world could offer, yet felt the profound emptiness we all know. His journey from that emptiness to the most revolutionary love the world has ever seen. That's our story today. In the next hour, you'll feel what he felt in those luxurious palace halls, the restlessness, the deep knowing that there must be more. You'll walk with him through forests where he nearly destroyed himself seeking truth. You'll sit beside him under a tree where everything changed, where loving kindness was born as a force that could transform the world. But we won't stop there, because his awakening unleashed something unstoppable. You'll witness a serial killer whose heart was melted by 3 simple words. You'll sit with a grieving mother who found peace through mustard seeds. You'll see how one person's revolution of love shattered every barrier that separates heart from heart. This isn't just the Buddha's story. This is the story of what becomes possible when one heart chooses love over fear, connection over separation, kindness over cruelty. This is your story. The story of the loving kindness revolution that began in him and continues in you. Feel that truth settling in your chest. You are not just listening to this story, you are part of it. The same longing that drove a prince from his palace lives in your heart. The same capacity for transformation that awakened under the Bodhi tree waits in your soul. So breathe with me one more time. Are you ready to discover how loving kindness can change everything? Are you ready to feel how one prince's revolution of the heart became a revolution that spans continents and centuries, and now arrives at your doorstep? Let's begin where all revolutions begin, in the depths of one seeking heart. Let's begin in a palace where everything was perfect, except for one restless soul. Come with me. Your heart already knows this path. Feel the soft silk beneath your skin. Imagine waking each morning in golden sunlight filtering through expensive brocade curtains. The gentle fragrance of lotus flowers drifting from crystal clear ponds. melodious music echoing from the distance. Everything your heart could desire, all there, within reach. This was the world of Prince Siddhartha. 3 palaces, one for each season. Gardens beautiful as paradise. Friends always joyful by his side. A beautiful and loving wife. Power, fame, every pleasure humanity could imagine. But pause for a moment. Have you ever had everything you thought you wanted, yet still felt empty? Have you ever achieved success that others envied, but secretly wondered deep inside, is this all there is? That's exactly the feeling creeping into the prince's heart. We all build our own palaces, don't we? Perhaps it's a successful career, perfect relationships, a beautiful home, or achievements we accumulate. We believe that when we have enough of these things, we'll be happy. But something whispers in the quiet moments. In those late afternoons when the music stops, when friends' laughter fades away, Prince Siddhartha began to hear the voice of his own soul. A question started forming, not in his head, but in his heart. Is this all that life has to offer? And then, one fateful day, he decided to step outside the palace walls. Do you know that feeling? When your heart urges you to look beyond the safe world you've built? When something inside you yearns for truth, even if that truth might cause you pain. The prince encountered an old man, white-haired and bent over. A sick person, frail and suffering. A corpse being carried down the street. And finally, a monk with deeply peaceful eyes. These 4 sights weren't just what he saw with his eyes. They were awakenings. The realization that all of us, rich or poor, beautiful or plain, must face old age, sickness, and death. Everything we cling to will eventually disappear. But there was something in that monk's eyes. A kind of peace the prince had never seen in any palace. A kind of freedom that didn't depend on external things. A kind of love that wasn't afraid of loss. And in that very moment, the first seeds of the loving-kindness revolution began to sprout. Can you feel it? Right there in your heart, right now, a similar understanding is waiting. You know that true happiness cannot be found in accumulating or possessing. You know there's something deeper, more real. That is loving kindness, not just for yourself, but for all who are going through this same struggle. Loving kindness for all hearts seeking meaning, yearning for true love. Prince Siddhartha sat in his palace that night, looking out at gardens beautiful as paintings, but his mind had traveled to distant places. Not places on maps, but unexplored territories of the human soul. He understood that all of us are suffering together. All of us are seeking together. All of us deserve love and understanding. And from that understanding, a decision began to form. Imagine that night. Midnight. The entire palace deep in sleep. Prince Siddhartha stood beside the bed, watching his beloved wife and newborn child sleeping peacefully. His heart felt torn apart. Have you ever stood at a crossroads where your soul called you forward, but love pulled you to stay? That's exactly the moment the prince was experiencing. This wasn't cruel abandonment. This was choosing between one kind of love and another kind of love. Between conditional, clinging love and infinite, free love. He understood that to truly love, not just his family but all beings, he had to find a way to transcend all boundaries of love. He had to find a way for his heart to have no limits. Feel the weight of that decision. Stepping away from everything familiar, safe, beloved. Walking into the unknown, without maps, without guarantees. Only with a deep faith that something more important than personal comfort was waiting. And then, in the silence of the dark night, the prince did what his soul had urged him to do. He took a sword and cut off his long hair, symbol of royal status. Each strand falling wasn't just abandoning title, but cutting through all illusions that happiness could come from outside. Have you ever had to let go of something to find yourself? Have you ever realized that the things you thought would make you happy were actually preventing true happiness? Sometimes, loving kindness requires us to let go. Not because we don't love, but because we love so deeply that we're willing to seek a more complete way of loving. The prince put on the pale yellow robes of spiritual seekers. In that moment, Siddhartha, the prince, died. And a seeker of truth was born. The first step outside the palace. Feel the courage in that step. Not the courage of a warrior with a sword, but the courage of a heart ready to face itself. The courage to admit, I don't know the answer, but I'm willing to search. This is the image of revolution. Not violence or destruction, but profound transformation, beginning from one courageous heart. A heart willing to give up everything to find what truly matters. When the prince stepped through the palace gates for the last time, he didn't look back. Not because he didn't care, but because he knew that true love sometimes requires temporary sacrifice to achieve eternal understanding. Your heart has made this journey. Maybe not leaving a palace, but you've stepped outside your own comfort zone. You've questioned what you believed was important. You felt the call of something greater than yourself. That's the spirit of the loving kindness revolution. It begins when we're brave enough to step beyond the limits we've placed on our own love. The path to truth is never straight. The seeker, now called the Bodhisattva, headed south to the land of Magadha, where spiritual seekers gathered. His heart swelled with hope. Surely, here someone could show him the path to enlightenment. Do you know that feeling? When you begin the journey of understanding yourself, seeking meaning, and you think that if you just find the right method, the right teacher, the right technique, everything will become clear? The Bodhisattva met Alara Kalama, a famous meditation master. Under his guidance, the Bodhisattva learned to take his mind into deep meditative states, where all thoughts, all emotions disappeared. A kind of absolute peace. But when he emerged from that meditative state, suffering was still there. True understanding of loving kindness still hadn't appeared. Have you ever succeeded at something, achieved a goal you thought would change your life, but then realized you were still yourself? Still with the same old questions, still with deep longings unmet? The Bodhisattva continued searching. He met Uddaka Ramaputta, another teacher, another method. This time, he achieved even more subtle states of consciousness. Almost no awareness of anything at all. But once again, when returning to the ordinary world, questions about the meaning of suffering, about how to truly love, still had no answers. Sometimes we think that love, loving kindness, can be found in techniques, in achieving some special state of mind. But the Bodhisattva was learning an important lesson. Peak experiences, however wonderful, cannot substitute for true understanding of the nature of love. And then, in disappointment, the Bodhisattva decided to try the other extreme. If pleasure didn't lead to enlightenment, then perhaps suffering would. If comfort didn't bring answers, then perhaps austerity would. For 6 years, the Bodhisattva tortured his body to the extreme, fasting until his ribs protruded like knife blades, exposing himself to blazing sun and bitter cold, sitting in meditation on chairs with sharp nails. Have you ever thought you needed to pay for happiness? That you needed to endure, sacrifice, even hurt yourself to be worthy of love? This is the violence we often inflict on our own hearts. We think loving kindness needs to be earned, needs to be proven through suffering. But after 6 years of self-torture, the Bodhisattva was near death, yet still hadn't found the answer. He was so weak he couldn't think clearly, couldn't feel the compassion he was seeking. And then, in his most desperate moment, a childhood memory flooded back. When he was a child, during a festival, little Siddhartha had sat under a tree and naturally fell into a meditative state. Without trying, without forcing, simply letting things happen naturally. In that state, he had felt a kind of peace and love that didn't need to be achieved or proven. It was simply there. Perhaps, the Bodhisattva thought, there's another way. Not through pleasure, nor through pain, but through balance, through gentleness, through acceptance. This was the moment the middle way was born. Not the path of extremes, but the path of understanding. Not the path of forcing the heart to open, but the path of creating conditions for the heart to naturally bloom. Do you recognize this wisdom in your own life? That the best things often come when we stop trying too hard? When we find balance between effort and letting go? Loving kindness cannot be forced. It cannot be earned through austerity or pleasure. It can only be nurtured through gentle understanding, through balanced care for both body and mind. And with that realization, the Bodhisattva began eating again, caring for his body, preparing for the next step of the journey. His companions had left him, thinking he had given up. But actually, he was just beginning to understand the true path to the revolution of loving kindness. True revolution is sustainable. It doesn't burn itself out to create light. It finds the light already present in the heart and nurtures it gently, patiently. Your heart already knows this. You already know that true love doesn't come from extremes, but from balance. From gentleness with yourself, from patience with your own process of healing and growth. And now, with the Bodhisattva ready, the journey toward the great night of awakening is about to begin. Picture yourself in complete stillness. The Bodhisattva had walked for days until he reached a place that seemed to call to his soul. Uruvela, by the banks of the Niranjara River. There, beneath a tree that would later be called the Bodhi tree, he prepared a simple seat of grass. Feel the earth beneath you as he sat down. This wasn't just another meditation session. This was a moment when determination met gentle resolve. When years of seeking crystallized into one perfect intention. As he crossed his legs and straightened his spine, the Bodhisattva made a vow that would echo through eternity. I will not rise from this seat until I have found the truth that can free all hearts from suffering. Can you feel the power of that commitment? Not driven by ego or ambition, but by pure loving kindness, the desperate need to understand how love could triumph over all the pain he had witnessed in the world. The sun set. Night descended like a gentle blanket over the earth. And as darkness embraced the world, something extraordinary began to unfold. In the deep stillness, when his mind had become perfectly calm, the Bodhisattva's consciousness began to expand. Suddenly, memories flooded back, not just from this lifetime, but from countless lifetimes before. He saw himself as a merchant, as a farmer, as a king, as a beggar. He experienced birth after birth, death after death. The endless cycle of seeking happiness in temporary things, of loving and losing, of hoping and despairing. But here's what touched him most deeply. In every single life, in every form he had taken, the same longing existed. The same desperate need to love and be loved. The same confusion, about how to find lasting peace. Have you ever had a moment where you suddenly understood that your struggles aren't unique? That every human being across all time has felt exactly what you're feeling? That we're all part of one great, seeking heart? As the night deepened, another kind of vision opened. The Bodhisattva began to see not just his own journey, but the journeys of all beings everywhere. He watched as creatures died and were reborn, seeing the invisible threads that connected their actions to their experiences. He saw how acts of kindness created waves of love that rippled across lifetimes. How moments of cruelty created cycles of pain that echoed through generations. How every choice to love or to harm sent vibrations through the fabric of existence itself. And in that seeing, his heart broke open with compassion. Because he understood that no one was choosing suffering on purpose. Everyone was simply doing what they thought would bring them happiness, what they believed would end their pain. The serial killer, the saint, the confused teenager, the worried parent, all just trying to find their way home to love. And then, in the final watch before dawn, the deepest truth of all began to reveal itself. The Bodhisattva saw clearly the four noble truths that would become the foundation of loving kindness for all time. First, he saw that suffering exists. Not as punishment, not as failure, but as a natural part of any heart that hasn't yet learned how to love without attachment, how to care without clinging. Second, he understood that suffering comes from craving, from the desperate attempt to make permanent what is naturally flowing, to possess what can only be shared. Third, the most beautiful truth of all, suffering can end. There is a way to love that doesn't create pain. There is a way to care that doesn't lead to disappointment. There is a way to live with an open heart that cannot be broken. And fourth, there is a path, 8 steps that any heart can follow to discover this unbreakable love. Feel this settling into your soul. This wasn't abstract philosophy. This was the most practical wisdom ever discovered. A roadmap for any human being to transform their suffering into compassion, their fear into love, their isolation into connection. As the first rays of sunlight touched the earth, something had fundamentally shifted. The man who had sat down in desperation was gone. In his place sat one whose heart had become a perfect mirror of loving kindness, reflecting back to every being their own innate capacity for love. The Buddha was born. Not through magic or divine intervention, but through the simple, revolutionary act of staying present with the truth of what it means to be human. Through refusing to turn away from pain and discovering that within pain lies the seed of all compassion. Can you feel this possibility alive in your own heart? Right now, in this moment, you carry the same potential. The same capacity to transform your understanding of what love means. same ability to see through the illusions that keep hearts separate. The tree that sheltered this awakening became known as the Bodhi tree, the tree of awakening. But the real awakening wasn't in the tree, or even in the man sitting beneath it. The real awakening was the birth of a love so vast, so unconditional, that it could embrace every form of suffering and transform it into wisdom. A love that could see the Buddha nature, the capacity for awakening in every being, no matter how lost they seemed. This is the love that changed the world. This is the love that continues to change hearts today. This is the love that is awakening in you, right now, as you hear this story and recognize it as your own. For 7 weeks, the newly awakened Buddha remained near the Bodhi tree, contemplating what he had discovered from every angle. The truth was so vast, so intricate, so beautiful, like a jewel with infinite facets, each one reflecting perfect light. But then came the question that would determine the fate of humanity. Should he teach? Feel the weight of this moment with me. Here was someone who had found the ultimate answer to human suffering, who had discovered how to transform any heart through loving kindness. But looking out at the world, doubt crept in. This truth is too deep, he thought. Too subtle. People are caught up in their desires, their fears, their busy lives. Who would have the patience to understand? Who would believe that such radical transformation is possible? Have you ever discovered something beautiful and wondered if anyone would understand? Have you ever felt the vulnerability of sharing your deepest insights, worried that others might not be ready to receive them? This wasn't arrogance speaking. It was the tender uncertainty of someone who had touched something so precious that he feared it might be misunderstood, dismissed, or misused. The Buddha's mind inclined towards silence. Perhaps, he thought, I should simply enjoy this peace quietly. Why exhaust myself trying to explain the unexplainable? And in that moment of hesitation, the ancient texts tell us something remarkable happened. A great being named Brahma Sahampati, described as the Lord of 1,000 worlds, suddenly appeared. This wasn't some external deity imposing his will. This was the voice of universal compassion itself, speaking through the very fabric of existence. Brahma bowed low before the Buddha. Imagine that. The Lord of worlds bowing to the power of awakened love, and made a plea that echoes through every heart that has ever felt called to serve. Please, awakened one, teach the Dharma. The world is drowning in darkness. There are beings with only a little dust in their eyes. They need only to hear the truth to awaken. For their sake, please speak. Can you feel the cosmic significance of this moment? It's not just about one person deciding whether to become a teacher. It's about whether loving kindness would remain a secret treasure or become a gift to all humanity. Moved by this plea, the Buddha opened his extraordinary perception and looked out upon the world. What he saw was both heartbreaking and hopeful. He saw beings like lotus flowers in a pond, some buried deep in the mud, some struggling toward the surface, some just about to bloom, and some already open to the light. Yes, he realized. There are those who are ready. Hearts that have been preparing for this message their entire lives. Souls that need only the gentlest touch of truth to burst into full awakening. Do you recognize yourself in this vision? Perhaps you are one of those lotus flowers, already so close to the surface that just hearing these words causes something to stir in your depths. Maybe you've been preparing for this understanding longer than you know. As the Buddha saw the suffering of the world alongside its infinite potential for awakening, his heart was moved by what the texts call great compassion, not pity, but the active love that cannot bear to see any being suffer unnecessarily. He understood that keeping this wisdom to himself would be like hoarding medicine while a plague ravaged the world. Loving kindness, by its very nature, cannot be contained. It must flow, it must share, it must give itself away completely. And so, with a heart full of tenderness for all who were still struggling in darkness, the Buddha made his decision. I will teach. 3 simple words that launched the greatest revolution of love in human history. Feel how this same compassion stirs in your own heart. When you see someone suffering, whether a stranger on the street or someone you love, don't you feel that same impulse? That desire to help, to heal, to share whatever wisdom or comfort you can offer? That impulse is your Buddha nature awakening. That's your participation in the same loving kindness revolution that began under the Bodhi tree. The decision was made. Now came the question, where to begin? The Buddha's thoughts turned to his first teachers, Alara Kalama and Uddaka Ramaputta. Surely they would be ready to understand. But when he reached out with his awareness, he discovered they had both died. Their hearts had been close, but time had run out. Then he remembered the 5 ascetics who had attended him during his years of self-mortification. The ones who had left in disgust when they thought he had abandoned the spiritual path. They were now living in a deer park at Sarnath, near the holy city of Benares. Perfect, the Buddha thought. If I can help them understand, if I can show them how loving kindness transcends all extremes, then perhaps others will listen too. Picture him walking the dusty roads towards Sarnath, each step taken in perfect mindfulness, each breath an offering of love to the world. This was no ordinary journey. This was the first movement of compassion going out to meet suffering. When the 5 ascetics saw him approaching, their first reaction was dismissal. "Here comes the quitter," they said to each other. "The one who gave up on serious practice and went back to luxury. Don't even acknowledge him." But as he drew nearer, something stopped them in their tracks. There was something different about this man. The way he moved, the light in his eyes, the peace that seemed to radiate from his very being. This wasn't the broken, defeated seeker they remembered. Have you ever encountered someone who had been fundamentally transformed? Someone who used to struggle just like you, but who had found a peace so deep it was unmistakable. There's a quality about such people that speaks before they say a word. Despite their intentions to ignore him, they found themselves rising, offering him a seat, bringing water for his feet. Something in their hearts recognized that they were in the presence of one who had found what they were all seeking. And then the Buddha began to speak. He didn't start with complex philosophy or mystical experiences. He started with the most basic human truth. We all suffer, and we all want to be free from suffering. Listen carefully, he said, his voice gentle but filled with authority. There are 4 noble truths that I have discovered, and understanding them can liberate any heart. We are all subject to birth, aging, sickness, and death. We experience the pain of separation from what we love, the frustration of not getting what we want, the anxiety of trying to hold on to what we have. This isn't a flaw in the system, it's simply what happens when awareness hasn't yet awakened to its true nature. Feel how he wasn't condemning life or declaring it hopeless. He was simply acknowledging what every honest heart already knows. This suffering doesn't come from outside circumstances. It comes from our craving, our desperate attempts to make permanent what is naturally impermanent. We suffer because we try to grasp flowing water, because we demand that life conform to our desires, rather than learning to dance with what is. Can you recognize this in your own experience? How much of your pain comes not from what happens, but from your resistance to what happens? But here's the revolutionary truth. This suffering is not inevitable. There is a way to love without attachment, to care without clinging, to live with an open heart that cannot be broken. This isn't about becoming cold or indifferent. It's about discovering a love so vast it fears no loss. This was the moment their hearts began to open. To hear that freedom was actually possible, that they weren't condemned to endless cycles of hope and disappointment. And there are 8 steps that lead to this freedom: right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Not right as in rigid rules, but right as in harmonious with the deepest truth of what it means to love. As the Buddha spoke, something extraordinary happened. These 5 men, who had been spiritual seekers for years, suddenly understood. Not just intellectually, but in their hearts. They saw how their own searching had been preparation for this moment. One by one, their eyes filled with tears of recognition. "We see it," they whispered. "We understand. This loving kindness you speak of, it's what we've been seeking all along." And in that moment, the first community of awakened hearts was born. The Buddha was no longer alone in his understanding. The revolution of loving kindness had begun to spread. Within days, more people began arriving at the deer park. Merchants, farmers, princes, beggars, all drawn by the reports of someone who had found a way to transform suffering into joy, fear into love, separation into connection. Each person who understood became a carrier of the same loving kindness. Like ripples spreading across a pond, the awakening began to touch heart after heart, community after community. Can you feel how this same ripple is reaching you right now? You are part of this lineage, this unbroken chain of hearts awakening to their capacity for limitless love. The same understanding that dawned in that deer park 500 years ago is dawning in your consciousness right now. But perhaps no story demonstrates the radical power of loving kindness more dramatically than what happened in the forests of Kosala. There lived a man whose very name struck terror into the hearts of all who heard it, Angulimala, the necklace of fingers. He was a serial killer who had murdered over 1,000 people, cutting off their fingers to string into a macabre necklace he wore around his neck. Imagine a heart so broken, so consumed by rage and confusion, that it could only express itself through violence. Imagine pain so deep that it could only relate to the world through causing more pain. We all have our own version of this darkness, don't we? Perhaps not expressed as dramatically, but we all know what it's like when hurt causes us to hurt others, when our own wounds make us sharp and dangerous to those around us. The entire kingdom was terrorized. Armed guards refused to pursue him. Merchants changed their routes. Parents warned their children with whispered stories of the finger necklace man in the forest. But the Buddha, with his perfect vision, saw something that no one else could see. Looking at this serial killer, this man everyone considered irredeemably evil, the Buddha saw a future saint. He saw that beneath all that violence was a heart capable of the most profound love, a soul that had simply lost its way so completely that destruction seemed like the only remaining option. This is the most radical aspect of loving kindness, whispers the heart of the teaching. It sees the potential for awakening in every being, no matter how far they seem to have fallen. Against all advice, against all common sense, the Buddha set out alone into the forest where Angulimala lived. When Angulimala spotted the lone monk walking calmly through his territory, his predatory instincts kicked in immediately. Another victim for my necklace, he thought, drawing his knife and racing after the Buddha. But then something impossible happened. No matter how fast Angulimala ran, he could not catch up to the Buddha, who continued walking at his normal, gentle pace. The killer ran until his lungs burned, until his legs screamed with exhaustion, but the distance between them never closed. Finally, gasping for breath, Angulimala called out, "Stop, monk. Stop." And the Buddha turned, looked at him with eyes full of compassion, and said words that would echo through eternity. "I have stopped, Angulimala. Now you stop too." I have stopped. Can you feel the layers of meaning in those simple words? The Buddha had stopped running from truth, stopped running from love, stopped the endless cycle of seeking something outside himself. He had found complete peace. Now you stop too. Stop running from your own pain. Stop trying to solve suffering with more suffering. Stop believing that you are beyond redemption, beyond love, beyond hope. In that moment, something in Angulimala's heart cracked open. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time in his life, he felt seen. Not as a monster, not as evil personified, but as a being capable of transformation. The knife fell from his trembling hands. "Teacher," Angulimala whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I see what you are. I understand why you came. Please, teach me. Show me how to stop." This is the miracle of loving kindness. It sees the Buddha nature in everyone. It approaches even the most violent heart with perfect confidence that love is stronger than fear, that light is more powerful than darkness. The Buddha accepted Angulimala as a student immediately. No probation period, no list of requirements, no gradual earning of trust. When a heart is ready to turn toward love, loving kindness responds instantly. Within months, Angulimala became one of the most compassionate monks in the Buddha's community. The hands that had once killed became hands that healed. The heart that had spread terror became a beacon of peace. But here's what makes this story even more profound. When Angulimala later walked through the same villages where he had once been feared, people threw stones at him. They couldn't believe that such transformation was possible. They wanted to punish him for his past, regardless of his present awakening. The Buddha's response was perfect. "Accept their anger patiently," he told Angulimala. This is the natural consequence of past actions. But know that your future is being written by your present love, not your past fear. This is loving kindness in its fullest expression. It takes complete responsibility for healing, while holding infinite patience for the process of healing in others. Feel how this story touches your own sense of what's possible. What violence in your own heart is ready to lay down its weapons? What part of you that feels irredeemable is actually just waiting for the right kind of love to help it transform? The loving kindness revolution doesn't sort people into good and evil, worthy and unworthy. It sees every heart as equally capable of awakening, equally deserving of compassion, equally able to become a force for healing in the world. That includes your heart. That includes every heart. The loving kindness revolution wasn't content to transform just individual hearts. As the Buddha's teaching spread, it began dismantling every artificial barrier that separated human being from human being. Picture the rigid social world of ancient India. For centuries, society had been divided into castes, rigid categories that determined your worth from birth to death. Brahmins at the top, enjoying access to sacred knowledge and religious authority. Warriors, merchants, laborers, and at the bottom, those considered untouchable, human beings treated as less than human simply because of the family they were born into. This wasn't just social organization, it was a spiritual apartheid that taught people their capacity for awakening was determined by their bloodline. But loving kindness recognizes no such distinctions. When people from different castes came to join the Buddha's community, some questioned whether this mixing was appropriate. The Buddha's response became one of the most revolutionary statements in human history. Just as the waters of the four great rivers, the Ganges, Yamuna, Sarabu, and Mahi, when they flow into the great ocean, lose their separate names and are simply called the water of the ocean, so when people from the four castes enter my teaching, they give up their caste distinctions and become simply awakened beings. Feel the radical power of that image. In the ocean of loving kindness, there is no hierarchy. No one is closer to or farther from the capacity for compassion. Every drop of water is equally wet, equally essential, equally part of the infinite whole. But the Buddha went even further. He completely redefined what makes a person noble. One is not born a Brahmin, he taught. One becomes a Brahmin through one's actions. One is not noble because of birth, but because of the nobility of one's heart. This wasn't just social reform, this was spiritual democracy. The revolutionary idea that every human being, regardless of circumstances of birth, has equal access to the highest wisdom, equal capacity for love, equal potential for awakening. Can you feel how this speaks to your own heart? Have you ever felt excluded, looked down upon, treated as less than because of circumstances beyond your control? Loving kindness sees through all such illusions to the luminous potential that exists in every being. Perhaps even more radical for its time was the Buddha's decision to fully include women in the spiritual community. In a world where sacred teachings were reserved for men, where women were seen as spiritual obstacles rather than spiritual equals, this was revolutionary. The first woman to approach the Buddha for ordination was his own stepmother, Mahapajapati. Initially, he hesitated, not because he doubted women's capacity for awakening, but because he knew how radical this step would be in his society. But loving kindness cannot exclude half of humanity from its embrace. When he established the order of nuns, women from every background flocked to join, queens and servants, mothers and daughters, even former prostitutes. All found in the Buddha's teaching a recognition of their complete spiritual equality. Many of these women achieved the highest levels of awakening, becoming teachers themselves, proving beyond doubt that wisdom has no gender, that loving kindness flowers equally in every type of heart. As the community grew more diverse, the Buddha articulated a universal ethical framework that transcended cultural and religious boundaries. These weren't commandments handed down from above, but natural expressions of an awakened heart. the 5 precepts became the foundation. Not harming living beings, because love protects life. Not taking what isn't given, because love respects others' well-being. Not engaging in sexual misconduct, because love honors trust and commitment. Not speaking falsely, because love communicates with integrity. Not using intoxicants, because love maintains clarity and awareness. But notice how these weren't arbitrary rules. They were insights into how loving kindness naturally expresses itself in daily life. Use yourself as the standard, the Buddha taught. What you would not want done to you, do not do to others. What would bring you happiness and peace, offer that to others. This golden rule wasn't unique to Buddhism, but the Buddha articulated it with unprecedented clarity. Ethics aren't external impositions, but the natural flowering of a heart that has realized its connection to all life. Feel how your own moral intuition recognizes this truth. You already know, without being told, that kindness feels better than cruelty, that honesty creates more harmony than deception, that generosity opens the heart while greed closes it. The loving kindness revolution simply gave people permission to trust their deepest wisdom about how love wants to express itself in the world. Of all the stories that illustrate the Buddha's perfect compassion, perhaps none touches the heart more deeply than his encounter with a mother named Kisagotami. She had been poor, married into a wealthy family that barely tolerated her presence, until she gave birth to a son. Suddenly, everything changed. The child became her whole world, the source of all her joy, the proof of her worth in her husband's family. But when the boy was just a toddler, he fell ill and died. Picture the complete devastation. Kisagotami refused to accept the reality. She held her dead child, convinced he was merely sick, going from house to house begging for medicine that could cure him. People called her mad, told her to accept what was obvious to everyone else. But grief doesn't listen to logic, does it? When we lose what we love most, the heart rebels against reality itself. We'll try anything, believe anything, if it means we don't have to face the finality of loss. Word reached Kisagotami that there was a great teacher, a Buddha, who could work miracles. Clutching her child's body, she ran to him with her desperate plea, "Please, give me medicine to cure my son." The Buddha looked at her with infinite tenderness. He didn't lecture her about impermanence or try to convince her with logic. Instead, he said simply, "I can make medicine for your child. But first, I need you to bring me a handful of mustard seeds from a house where no one has ever died." Hope flared in Kisagotami's heart. Mustard seeds, such a simple thing. She rushed from house to house in the village. "Mustard seeds?" "Of course," each household replied. But when she added, "Has anyone in your family ever died?" the answer was always the same. "Here, my father died. Here, my mother. Here, my husband. Here, my daughter. Door after door, the same story. Every household touched by death. Every family acquainted with loss. Slowly, as the day wore on, a deeper understanding began to dawn in Kisagotami's heart. She wasn't alone in her suffering. Death wasn't a cruel exception that had singled her out. It was the universal experience that connected her to every human being who had ever lived. As the sun set, she returned to the Buddha without any mustard seeds, but carrying something infinitely more precious, the recognition that her grief was part of the greater human experience, that her love was connected to all love, that her loss was held by the losses of countless mothers throughout time. Done, Lord, is the business of the mustard seeds, she said quietly. Grant me refuge. The Buddha had given her exactly what she needed, not a magical cure that would separate her from the human condition, but the medicine of connection, the healing that comes from realizing we're all in this together. Kisagotami's love for her son didn't diminish, it expanded. Her grief didn't disappear, it transformed into compassion for all who grieve. Her heart didn't close, it opened wide enough to hold the sorrow and joy of all existence. This is perhaps the most profound teaching about loving kindness. It doesn't eliminate pain, but it transforms our relationship to pain. It shows us that our individual suffering is held within a much larger love, that our personal losses are part of a universal story of love meeting impermanence. Feel how this touches your own experiences of loss. Every goodbye you've had to say, every change you've had to accept, every dream you've had to release, these aren't flaws in your story. They're the places where your heart learned to love more deeply, more universally, more compassionately. Kisagotami became one of the most wise and compassionate teachers in the community, helping others navigate their own encounters with loss and change. Her grief had become her gift, her wound had become her wisdom. As the years passed and the Buddha's community grew to thousands, something remarkable became clear. He had an uncanny ability to speak to each person exactly as their heart needed to hear. This wasn't manipulation or clever psychology. This was loving kindness so refined that it could perceive precisely what would open each unique heart to its own potential for awakening. To the intellectual, he offered sophisticated philosophy. To the simple farmer, he told stories. To the grieving, he shared comfort. To the angry, he demonstrated patience. To the proud, he offered humility. To the humble, he revealed their hidden greatness. Like a master musician who knows exactly which key will create the most beautiful harmony, the Buddha could read the unique melody of each soul and respond with perfect pitch. This is the ultimate expression of loving kindness. Love so attentive, so present, so genuinely interested in each being's welfare that it meets them exactly where they are and guides them gently toward where they could be. 45 years, the Buddha walked the dusty roads of India, town to town, village to village, heart to heart. Never building monuments to himself, never accumulating wealth or power, simply offering the medicine of loving kindness to anyone ready to receive it. When he was 80 years old, lying on his deathbed surrounded by disciples, his final words captured the essence of everything he had taught. All conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. Even in death, he was teaching, showing that awakening doesn't exempt us from the natural flow of existence, but transforms our relationship to that flow. And reminding his students that no one else can do their inner work for them. The revolution of loving kindness isn't dependent on any one person. It lives in every heart that chooses love over fear, connection over separation, compassion over indifference. And here we are, 25 centuries later, feeling the same stirrings in our hearts that moved a prince to leave his palace in search of truth. Take a deep breath with me. Feel what has shifted in your awareness during this journey we've shared. The young man who sat in restless luxury, wondering if there was more to life, his questions live in you. The seeker who tried every extreme before finding the gentle middle way, his struggle is your struggle. The awakened one who saw past all differences to the universal capacity for love, his vision is awakening in your vision. This isn't just history. This isn't just inspiration. This is the most practical truth ever discovered, that every human heart, including yours, contains the seeds of limitless loving kindness. Every moment of patience you offer in traffic, you continue the Buddha's revolution. Every time you choose understanding over judgment, you water those ancient seeds. Every act of genuine care for someone different from yourself, you prove that the barriers between hearts are always, ultimately, illusions. The serial killer who became a saint reminds you that no part of yourself is beyond transformation. The grieving mother who found universal love in personal loss shows you that even your deepest pain can become your greatest gift. The breaking of every social barrier demonstrates that your capacity for love has no limits, no restrictions, no exceptions. Feel the responsibility. Feel the joy. Feel the incredible honor of being part of this lineage of awakening hearts. The loving kindness revolution that began under a tree in India continues in your living room, your workplace, your family relationships, your private moments of choice between love and fear. You are not just learning about this revolution, you are this revolution. If something in this journey has touched you, if you felt that ancient recognition of truth, then you've found your way to where hearts rest. This isn't the end of our exploration together. It's an invitation to go deeper. Subscribe to continue this heart revolution with us. Join a community of souls who understand that the most radical thing we can do in this world is to love without limit, to see the sacred in the ordinary, to treat every encounter as an opportunity for awakening. Share in the comments what shifted in your heart today. Which part of the Buddha's journey felt most like your own? Let's create a space where the loving kindness revolution can continue, heart to heart, story to story, awakening to awakening. until we meet again in this sanctuary of stories and souls. May your heart know its own limitless nature. May your love be the revolution the world is waiting for. May you find rest in the truth that you are already, always, perfectly held in the embrace of loving kindness itself. The jewel is in your heart. The revolution begins with your next breath. Welcome home.